My turn to kick it off this time. Yeah, before we get started, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But we'll have a question answered at the end. If it happens to be something we can talk about during, cool. I'll let someone else talk about GoFundMe, because not my thing. Cool, so festivals, showcases, and rep. I have never done a festival. Closest thing I've done is rep. So the past 4 years, I would go up to New Hampshire or Maine and work there, always as an ASM, never as a PSM, because I do not have that confidence to be the PSM and oversee all of that, not yet. But backstage as an ASM with rep, I love the moving pieces. So for me, the first summer was 7 shows. Did 6 of them, calling 1, 5 backstage. Most of them were musicals. The next 3 summers did 3 shows, calling 2 backstage, or calling 1 backstage for 2. Very different schedules, but at least it ties into festivals in that after every performance, we were putting everything away. The scenery was striking. As an ASM was mainly making sure that props got in a box and went away and props came back, remembering the paperwork, being on top of being able to shift between which show is there. Luckily, we'd have about an hour and a half before shows, at least to get into the props preset, which is probably a little bit generous compared to festival. Spikes were interesting for us. The past 3 years, we'd make sure we have a specific color for each show, because you'd have 6 different shows spiked on the stage, and we didn't hide them between shows. So you either were sparing or made sure you remember what color you were and distinguish with shapes in that. Or sometimes we do 2 colors, but you knew those 2 colors were for that show. Because writing on them, not going to help you in a scene shift. I was fortunate in that we had false decks sometimes, so the spikes were already on the deck, didn't have to worry about that. Deck went away. That was a lifesaver. Yeah, the weirdest situation I've had is for the past 3 years, instead of just rehearsing one show then opening it, for 3 weeks you would rehearse one show for 2 days, another show for 2 days, another show for 2 days. And it was a weird schedule, but that was mine. So it was constantly shifting your brain to what show you were doing each day. Sometimes it overlapped at night. And sometimes in production meeting, you just have to shift from one to the other as you're talking or checking in with department heads. But that makes it kind of easier, especially me as an ASM. Constantly being the first ASM, at least they knew they could touch base with me on multiple shows at the same time. I was lucky in that ASM, I did not have to deal with the schedule too much for the company, but there was that. And then showcases. Those contracts I did were not on showcases. They were out, again, in New Hampshire and Maine, so we were on kind of a reference to LORT contract, which was nice and covered everything. Showcase, done a couple in the city. Oftentimes they have been smaller with rules that are similar to festivals, but I'll let someone else cover how they're similar because I don't know. But generally you have smaller space, not as much time to put them up, so it was fast. And props and storage were an issue sometimes. So that's what I got on that. I'll let someone else take away for the showcase side, or I forget who's next.
It's me.
Yay.
I actually just linked, I just put in the chat a document that I created that lists all the Fringe festivals, because there's more than just New York's Fringe. I'm sorry if you hear a crying dog in the background. My dog is crying in the background. So, there's a whole bunch of Fringes that we couldn't possibly all go into right now. There's just way too many of them. But I have done the New York, the Fringe NYC, or the New York International Fringe Festival, which the show that I did for that was called John Goldfarb, Please Come Home, which was a musical. I think it was a 20-person cast, 5-person band. A couple notable shows from the Fringe are Urinetown and Dog Sees God, and Debbie Does Dallas. Ironically started in New York. I also have done the Nymph Festival, which was the New York musical theater or musical festival, which their last season was last year, I believe, 2004 to 2019. And the show for that was called Like Love. And similar to what Ingrid did, you're sharing the space with multiple shows. So you get assigned a spike tape color, and your producer usually will supply that tape for you, and you have to cover them between when your show is not performing, just to avoid confusion for everybody else involved, because you are sharing the space, like I said. What was the other? Crown Point Festival was another festival that I did. That was at the Abrams Art Center down in the West Village, I think it is, the Henry Street project. And shows that I was the rehearsal SM for The Girl Detective and Hostages, which is now called Hostage Song, which was written by Kyle Jarrow, who also wrote the book for SpongeBob. That was actually a different situation where there was a bunch of us working together as rehearsal SMs, and then we became the ASMs backstage and the crew and for the actual festival, where Zach Chandler actually PSM'd that. Some of you guys might know him. And that was fun. That story, I wound up going, I was returning lights from my Nymph show, got a phone call from Zach asking me to come in for an interview. And I was like, give me an hour. I got to go to Big Apple, return these lights. I apologize ahead of time. I'm really sweaty because it is the middle of summer and it's hot. So he saw me on the fly really quick that one day, and he hired me there. So that was cool. But yeah, we actually did not cover our spikes for those shows because it was the same crew of people, which made it interesting when we started pulling spikes at the end of the festival, and people who had been using those spikes for their sight lines realized they're no longer there. And then another festival I did was called In Her Name Festival. That was with Shellen directed that. And that was a 3-day festival of, I think it was 32 plays or 36 plays, where that was a lot of making sure the next performance was ready to go. I was not running cues or anything like that. I was running up and down the stairs, making sure everybody was in their correct place. Showcases I've done. So I've also done the Broadway Bound Festival. That was the most recent festival that I did. It was in 2017. Those other ones were all back in 2007. Showcases I've done are Never the Sinner, which was with the Woodshed Collective. I Google myself with Theater Askew, and My Dog Heart was at Ensemble Studio Theater, and that was part of their marathon of one-act plays that they do each summer, or, well, not this summer, but, you know. And that's basically my rundown of shows that I've done and festivals that I've done. And I'm going to toss it to Lisa next.
And Lisa's going to try something brand new. I've never shared content, so bear with me here. Oh, it won't let me share. It says only Taylor can. Oh, well, that's fine. I have also done Nymph and Broadway Bound. And I'll throw the picture up later in our Facebook page. But I come from a background of teaching high school theater. And in North Carolina, we have the high school play festival. So I went as a student and I went as a teacher many, many times. So one of the things that I learned very quickly, the first festival I did, which was Nymph, I was not stage managing, but I was working props, was that you have to fit everything into a very small space backstage, which is 4x4, I believe. And okay, I'll get. Our production manager was really freaking out about all this stuff. We had this huge backdrop. We had, of course, tons of props and set pieces. And I looked at Fritz and I said, "Oh, we can get all this in there." And he went, "Seriously?" And so we put everything inside of stuff and piled everything up and ended up using bungee cords and got everything in the 4x4 space so well that the other production manager started coming by and taking pictures of what we did to be able to fit their stuff in their space. So those skills you think you're never going to use, you end up using later. I've also done the Broadway Bound Festival. I did a show there in 2018 when they were still at 14th Street Y. And I will be doing Broadway Bound again come February if things work out. A show that I've been working on called Ordained that I've been doing readings for the last 2 years has just been selected for the festival. So I will go back to Broadway Bound, which is now at Theater Row on 42nd Street in Theater 5, which is one of their 99-seat theaters there at Theater Row. Also, again, you have small storage spaces, making sure that you have things that you can store props and things in. I know the last show that I did, we in 2018 at Broadway Bound, we used an ottoman that had storage space in it. And that was one of the reasons we bought that piece of furniture, was so that you could put stuff in it and store. The other festival that I have done here in the city is called the Dream Up Festival. It's down at Theater for the New City in the East Village. A festival I honestly would never do again. It's the most disorganized festival I've ever done. Didn't know these still existed, but got instructions to bring a floppy disk for the light board. Yeah, so the lighting designer and I looked at each other and went, do they still make floppy disk? Okay. Found one to store your lights on, of course. The biggest issue with that festival was tech time. The tech time was not long enough to get in and get everything situated. And then the way the schedule was set up, you had 30 minutes after the show before you finished to get into the dressing room, get your set and props ready to go, and then you would start your performance. The first night we performed, the show before us was supposed to end at, and we were supposed to start at 9. They ended at 9:15. So we're scrambling to get in. We're 15 minutes behind on when we're supposed to start, and we're still supposed to be able to have 30 minutes to set up. And it was our first show, so of course, you're working out the kinks and making sure everything's where it's supposed to be. And they also had scheduled that the show, as they finished, your 30 minutes of moving into the dressing room, which we all shared the same dressing room, and moving into the space was their 30 minutes to get out. So you're literally moving around, people trying to get out, and you're trying to get in and get a show up in 30 minutes, which was insane. Their storage was also downstairs. So everybody had to take set pieces down the stairs into a basement area, which they also used, they rented out for rehearsal. So you'd be bringing things down, and so we'd be in the middle of rehearsal, and you feel bad interrupting, but you're on a schedule, so you have to do it. We spiked the same way we did at Broadway Bound. Once you were done with your show, you covered it with black gaff tape. You marked it with a gold or a silver Sharpie with your initials, and then you pull that up when you go back to your spikes. So those are some examples of the festivals that I've done here in the city. And I will turn it over to Lizzie to talk a little bit more about her experience with festivals.
Thank you. So I've had a taste of festival showcases and rep throughout my career. I actually had to write it down because I've done so many showcases and festivals. I couldn't remember till today. Oh yeah, I've done this one. Oh yeah. And even just as Taylor and Lisa were talking, oh yeah, I have actually done that festival. So in college, I went to the University of Rhode Island for stage management. We did a festival every year called the 322s, which was the name of the class. but then you had a presentation of, I think it was 5 to 7 plays from the senior student directors every year, and it was called the One Act Festival. So I did it my junior year as one of the deck stage managers, and then my senior year I was the production stage manager for, I believe it was 7 one-act plays. So it was good that I had a taste of that in college, actually, with practicing scene shifts and paying attention to detail paperwork and working with a pretty massive crew for just a college show. And then after my junior year of college, I worked at the Williamstown Theater Festival, which, if you know Williamstown, I think it's considered the best summer stock in the country. And that was extremely invaluable to be one of the I was a production management intern, but I was also an assistant production manager on a few of the projects that summer. And it was great to be in the production management office rather than a stage manager, because you work with every single department, and at all hours of their day, whether it's 2 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon, someone might come to you with a problem, and you are doing fast changeovers and just working. And really the trick to a festival and rep and showcases is being a good sport. That doesn't mean not being treated professionally or with respect. Of course, any project in any industry should be treated professionally and respectfully, but you do have to be a good sport, because sometimes you're going to have to wear a hat that you're not always confident with, but that also builds a certain skill set. The other festivals I've done in New York City, which a lot you've heard already, I've done NYMF, I've done New York Winter Festival, I've done Midtown International Festival, I've done Planet Connections, I've done something at the Cow, which is on the Lower East Side, I have done the United Solo Festival, I have done readings and plays at the Here Art Center for their festivals. I did a show I did was a part of a reading festival at the Kennedy Center last August. So but we treated it as a regular production, the solo show. So they gave me half an hour to design and build my lights at the Kennedy Center, while putting together video and sound with our designers, and then doing the show in less than 70 minutes. I will say Kennedy Center has by far the nicest stagehands I've ever worked with anywhere. So that made life really easy. And it was a really fabulous experience. They actually had to hold the house for us for a few minutes, not because of tech, just because of a script change thing at the last second. But they were so nice and calm for us. And I would go back in a heartbeat. I think we were actually supposed to go back this summer, but due to the virus, we aren't. But maybe in the future that will happen again. The taste of repertory theater I've had was I did Puffs when it was off Broadway at the Electra before it was at New World Stages. That theater doesn't exist anymore on 43rd and 8th, but the way they treated Puffs was in rep, because there were 2 or 3 other shows that were happening in that same theater, and there were 4 of us on the stage management team. And again, being a good sport, paying attention to your duties and tasks, while also sometimes having to hop in and help someone else, because we had half an hour to set up a farce and a door show. And if you watched Puffs the other night with some of us, or you've just seen Puffs on your own or on Amazon, it's a lot, because it's a farce. And then the show is 90 minutes and then half an hour to take it down. We were fortunate in the sense that a lot of our shows were at 9:30, so we were the last show in. So sometimes they'd give us 45 minutes if we were the last show, which that does happen. That's the good and the bad of the perks of festival and rep and showcases, because you are there for a long time, but sometimes they're a little more lenient. But then of course there's the fun of running to the train and making sure you get home, because you might be the early one the next day. So, good and bad of that. I also production stage managed for 2.5 years at Joe's Pub, a live podcast, which was treated like rep. So we had sometimes 15 minutes to set up stage. Not that there was a lot, but it was also with cameras, because it was filmed live. And so that was also a trick. So if you were given the 7 o'clock show and you had 3:30 sound check and rehearsal, they kind of let you keep that stuff on stage because you were going right into your show. That was nice. If you were the 9:30 show, you had rehearsal at 1:30 in the afternoon. That was kind of the pain in the butt end of it, and also just the downtime and sitting in the dressing room and the exhaustion and that kind of comes over you. And you have to take care of yourself and remember to pace. And on those days, fortunately, we had fewer 9:30 shows than 7 o'clock shows. That was in the contract, but we did have to do 9:30 shows occasionally. New York Musical Theater Festival was a great experience for me. The show I was on, won that summer for best production. It was The Snow Queen, which is actually what Frozen is based on. Beautiful show, beautiful score. There was actually one instance, and I was one of like 4 production assistants on that. The ASM asked me to run out and buy a prop at CVS at the last second. I knew in the back of my head that probably wasn't a good idea 15 minutes before curtain, but at the same time, my ASM asked me to do that. So again, be a good sport, do what you're asked. I got back to run the sound in the video for that. The ASM got in trouble. I didn't. The PSM was like, you did the right thing by doing that. I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at the ASM that asked you to go do that. But again, I did what I was asked to do, and even though I knew in the back of my head that's probably not a good idea, and they ended up finding the prop backstage at the last second, which, also there were a lot of props in that show being organized, not just throwing stuff in a box. But again, I was just running the sound and video for that show, so that was the deck stage manager's responsibilities to make sure all those props were accounted for every show. And I guess most recently, for writing, a play of mine was a part of Pride Play Festival, but that was all through Instagram, so a little less of a headache when not having to, go to the theater and kind of go in, even though it would have just been a reading with the music stand and adjusting lights. But that is the last festival I was a part of, so it was Pride Pieces on Instagram. So different, not as much of a headache, but still a part of a festival in that regard. That's all I can remember of that at the moment. I do a lot of showcases, and I kind of stopped doing showcases just because of the fee, which we're going to talk about, because sometimes there is a set fee for stage managers and actors, especially on showcases. And, as you progress in your career, you're going to have a set rate, and you're not going to be able to necessarily take those jobs, even though they are fun and you learn a lot from them. But I'm going to turn that over to my partners so we can talk about the financial side of it.
Yeah, I'll speak to the financial side of showcases. When I moved to New York 4 years ago, the very first show I did was a showcase. And I had money saved up. I'd sold my house, so I knew I was not in a position where I had to necessarily worry about money. And I was brand new to the city. I'd been here 10 days. And so I took it for $500. That's not uncommon. However, I've done showcases and gotten $3,500, $4,000 for a showcase. So there's a wide range. Showcase code only guarantees in the code that you are provided transportation to and from rehearsals and performances. And then 12 performances, if you add the 4 extra to go to 16, I think it's $10 extra for each of those 4 performances.
And I think
so it can vary.
I think the transportation isn't like, oh, taxi. Generally, it's assumed to be MetroCard swipe.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
My reimbursement never covered my full ticket, because I come from Long Island, and it depended on when I was actually starting rehearsals and or performances, whether I would buy a weekly ticket or a monthly ticket. Because if I was already 2 weeks into the month, I'm not buying a monthly ticket or a 10 ride ticket. So it varied. But what I always did was I said I need the money up front, or I need at least half up front, because I have to get here. And that's what the reimbursement is supposed to be for, is for me to get to this space. So that was part of my deal generally. But I usually stop doing showcases generally because of the fee. Wasn't
Yeah.
I always ask for half up front as well. That I think you have to do that in that particular instance. And there are some showcases that I've done have done a flat fee and given you here we figured out how much it's going to cost for you to take the subway here and back for X number of days. Some producers will hand you a monthly Metro card, which is nice. So it just depends. And I always say get that information up front, because sometimes they like to hide things. I did a showcase I was on the fence about taking it, and I took it not long after I got here, and I was promised a fee up front that I was like, oh, this is more than I've been getting. This is nice. And then got into the rehearsal process and found out that fee was transportation, which they handed me a check for the first day. And the rest of the fee was because they had gotten permission from Equity to videotape, and they had to pay that videotape fee. And that even wasn't the entire fee, because part of that was going out to go to pension, for Equity pension. So always ask those questions up front, so you know exactly what those fees are that you're getting paid for are and where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I would say also be forthcoming with what your demands, for lack of a better word, are, because they might not expect you to ask for the half up front. I think most of them don't, because they rely on the ticket sales to pay you and everybody else. And whether the rest of my company has asked for that same courtesy, that's not my problem. I can't police them or anything like that, but I expect to make part of it up front so that I can get to where they need me to be. Or at least I did when I was doing them.
And I will say that also on that, I now demand a contract. There is no contract for Showcase Code that comes from Equity. I now demand one if I ever have to do a showcase. And I will have to for Broadway Bound, because it's a festival where they're going to have equity and non-equity. And so I know that they'll go under Showcase Code for that, to do that particular show. And I always, if I have to do that, now have a contract so it's in writing.
Yeah, you don't get the contract, you get the signature sheet.
Yeah.
Which doesn't
do you any good.
Actually, a piece of advice I want to give is, so I actually, for any showcase I do or festival, I ask for it in full. And in New York State, a verbal contract is a binding contract, but as the daughter of a lawyer, that doesn't slide. So I always write up my own contract. If anyone has any questions about how to write a contract, and it does not have to be 18 pages long, it can be 3 sentences. That is legally binding in this state and probably most other states. I think in California that is also legally binding. That I'm happy to talk to you about that offline. I always ask for it up front. If they don't do it, I won't work on the show. They have to give me, for a showcase or a festival, the full, whether it's a check or Venmo or PayPal, whatever, up front, first day of rehearsal. And that's also for my security in case, I mean, I've never been fired, but that's also in case someone ever fired me, I've been paid. For my security. And so if you are doing a showcase or festival, that's not at Williamstown. I will say, if you're doing like, NYMF or Fringe or something like that, feel confident about asking for that check fully up front. They can afford it. If they've hired you and you're going to give you that rate at the end, they can give it to you day one. And, depending on how the show does, if it extends in ticket sales, you'll get the bonus at the end. And that's an end in your contract. You can put that as well. But your rate up front, and make sure you're comfortable with that rate. The other thing about showcases is, one, you do not have to be Equity to be the stage manager. I am not union, and I've done a ton of showcases. You should still know the codes for the AAA showcase and the contract and all that, because your actors will usually, most of the time, be AA. The other thing about it is that because actors can go and run to auditions and they can leave anytime. I've worked on shows where actors are like, I'm dropping because I got this. And they can. They don't really need an explanation in that contract about it. So know the ins and outs of the showcase code, so that you're not surprised by anything. I also forgot the first show I ever did in New York, which was right after I graduated from college after a couple productions. I was the PSM and sound designer for F Fest at a small comedy club. And I remember having, for the final musical in that festival, 7 minutes to tech their sound design. But it also taught me so much being able to do that in a small booth in a comedy club that wasn't equipped for a musical. But it was invaluable in that moment and helped me so much in furthering my career as a sound designer and programmer. Yeah.
Do you mind if I just go into some very brief differences between some of those, like financially in terms of each of the things we mentioned?
Go for it.
So Showcase, which we've mentioned a lot, is technically, it's not like a full agreement for actors' equity. So as Lizzie said, you don't have to be an equity member to do a showcase. Anyone can. You can't join on a showcase because it's not like a full contract that it's being able to work without really the benefit of the contract. So stage managers can leave at any time too, because it's not a full contract, which is great. And they also have to work around your availability, which is great. I know there's something about, I'm trying to find with when the fee has to be paid, whatever it is, but I think in the code there is, and it's like half, I can't remember when each one is, but one payment of it is opening night or first performance, because first performance is opening on a code.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ingrid, the first payment, the first half is due the first day of rehearsal,
There you go.
and then the second half is due opening night.
And
Great.
I'm going to jump in really quick about them having to work around your schedule, because in many an instance, I was working 2, maybe 3 showcases at the same time, where I would be in performance for 1 and rehearsing for maybe 2 or something like that. It's doable. It's not fun. But
Done it myself.
yeah. But
I didn't know. Yeah.
you show up when you can, essentially, and the one that you are currently working on, the first one you got hired for, in my opinion, should be your first priority. Second one, third, and secondly. But the second and third ones need to understand that I've got these other things. They hired me first. They are also paying me, whether it be a lot or a little. They're still paying you. So you owe them your time for that time, and when you get to rehearsal, you are in full gear with your next show. Those are the
What I want to say is like, no, sorry, Taylor, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. You're good.
What I was going to say is, yes, they typically can just pay you the first day of rehearsal and then opening, but you can ask for it in full the first day. There's nothing illegal about that. There's nothing wrong about that. It's perfectly legitimate. And not just stage managers and actors can quit. Anyone can quit. Designers, producer, writer. Because I did, I think it was the New York Winter Festival. I think that's what it's called. Several years ago, and I thought we had a lighting designer, and they just never showed up. And because it was the first day tech, and I knew how to do lighting design, and I wasn't gonna let the show down, I just did it. Because I'm able to. Not every stage manager obviously can do a certain type of design, and that's not a requirement for stage management, though I think there should be a basic knowledge of all that stuff in stage management, and a basic knowledge of stage management for the other artists in our industry. But I stepped in and just did it because I didn't want to let the production down, and we had already made it to the our first performance and day of tech. So if you are comfortable and confident with that, and you can get paid more, and I did, do it. But hopefully that also doesn't happen where your designer just never shows up and you don't hear from them. And I actually don't remember the reason why the designer didn't show up, but they just didn't. So I just had to step in and do it.
Yeah.
But it does happen though.
I actually have an example of a time for me when it was an instance to say no. It was for when I was doing Nymph, it was for Like Love, where I was the ASM initially. I eventually, because the PSM had to leave, She had a family emergency. I wound up bumping up to the PSM, but I think it was our first or second day of rehearsal. I'm still the ASM, and our producer, who was a nice guy, but didn't quite understand what his job was, I think. We asked who the prop person was. We figured it was a scenic designer because a lot of the time they will tend to buy their own stuff, or they have their own stuff and they'll bring it with them. Especially in something like a festival situation where it's a very quick turnaround. There was no one. And the producer assumed that I was going to be doing props and acquiring props. And I said, when would I do that? When I'm in rehearsal all day. And I think he said to the then PSM at the time, well, what did she expect to be doing? And her answer to him was assisting me, because that was my job, was to assist her at the time. So it wound up being, and I told him, no, I'm not doing that. And it worked in my favor that time. And the scenic designer did wind up just doing the props himself, because it wasn't that it was a whole lot of things. It was just, I wasn't going to be able to do it because I was in rehearsal every day with them with the show. So you rehearse a lot for a festival that maybe only performs 4 times. So
That's not to say that they couldn't ask you to do it and get a fee on top of it, but
yeah,
beforehand knowledge.
Yeah, it was beforehand knowledge, and I wasn't going to get an extra fee.
But that's not uncommon for producers, particularly for festivals. Most of the producers are the writers, and they've never had this experience before. They don't have a background in theater other than writing, and they don't know who is responsible for what. So that's not uncommon for them to assume that you may be doing something that is not your responsibility. So sometimes part of the festival work becomes us educating producers, writers, etc., on what our responsibilities are, what as a PSM or as an ASM, as a PA, and what they need. Hopefully you have somebody that asks up front, but sometimes that doesn't happen.
Yeah, because I think even the director sort of overheard that conversation, and she was like, what are you? No.
Everyone has a different knowledge of theater and basics.
Yeah.
So.
I was also going to say,
I feel confident having that. Oh, sorry, Taylor.
No, go ahead.
No, you finish, and then I'll say what it is.
I was going to say that festivals and showcases and such are definitely an art of Tetris, where when you complete a row or a column, nothing disappears. So you don't ever gain space. It's that 4-foot rule is like, you can fit a lot in a very small space. And I will say, working, it was on I Google Myself, which was with Theater Askew. We were at Under St. Mark's Place, and a friend of mine worked there. I think it was a year or so later on a completely different show, obviously, and she was doing the props for them. And at the end of the night, you got to store your props in the shed that they have back in the courtyard. And the shed, the top, I would say 1.5 feet was open. There was the roof and there were 4 sides, but the back of it, there was a completely open space. So we had to acquire a tarp, and we were keeping our lighting board in there, sound equipment, stuff like that. Yeah, it wasn't really conducive to that because they actually rented a light board. They didn't use the spaces board. So I forewarned my friend Allie. I was like, just so you know, bring a drop cloth, because I assume that they have not replaced their shed. It's probably still there 10 years later, actually 13. So if anyone works at Under St. Mark's Place, know if they fixed their shed.
I have not been there in about 8 years, but I remember it. But just to see a show, not to work on. What I was going to say is when it comes to festivals and showcases, the producers and directors sometimes can take advantage of the stage managers and the crew. So feel confident they almost will every time, by the way. So feel confident before you're hired, having the conversations of, are these my duties and responsibilities for this production? yes, if something comes up at the last second and it doesn't feel uncomfortable to have to take on that responsibility, do it. But if you're going to be asked to do props or costumes or something and you're not being paid to do that, or you simply just don't want to, have that conversation then and not, the day before your first tech. Because it happens all the time.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Lizzie.
That's all I was gonna say.
Sorry, my dog is knocking into my desk right now.
Yeah, is that the crying I heard?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the not leaving things to the day before your first day of tech and or only day of tech, more likely, is definitely something you can't work. You can't work with that because under a showcase code, you get double the amount of your runtime for your tech, and that's
Not all showcases.
Oh
Yeah.
okay. That's
I guess this is kind of a point where it's like, yes, festivals often use showcases, but showcases are used for things other than
things,
festivals. For example, mostly on a showcase, your day isn't allowed to be more than, I want to say, 6 hours maybe.
Correct.
And after 5 hours, you have to take a meal break. So it's 6 hours rehearsal.
Yep.
But when you're teching, so about a week, aside the week of or the week before your first performance, you're allowed, I think, 2 8 out of 10 days. So there's no limit really based on the union on tech. Some go fast because you don't have access to the space. Oh, 3.
Depends on
3, yeah.
it. Depends. What was Fringe? Was that the double year runtime? I think.
Maybe.
Right.
Something.
Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Which,
and with the showcase, with the 3 days of tech, the 8 of 10s, here's what can get you. In the code, it says in the week before your performance. Most showcases, people are going to have day jobs as well as being involved in the show.
Mhm.
And a lot of theaters will want to say, well, I can use Saturday and Sunday as 2 of those 8 of 10s. Where does the third one go? Do I ask my actors to take a day off from their day job and put it on Monday or Tuesday, for example? Or do I use it the weekend before? And a lot of the theaters that I've done showcases for want to put it the week before, which you have to get permission from Equity to do. I've had Equity say yes. I've had Equity say no.
Yeah.
With all the actors saying that's what they want to do. So there is some flexibility in there, but recognize that a lot of times with showcases, you or your actors may have a day job, so they're coming to rehearsal after that. They're coming to rehearsal all weekend, so that kind of shifts things. It's not, like some of the other contracts where you're rehearsing all day and then you go home.
Yeah, and I've also had press photography taking up some of that time as well, things like that, or interviews, things like and such, which those got thrown in pretty much right at the last second. We got no notification of that, and I had to call each actor individually before they even got to rehearsal saying, I called our deputy first, and because if he wasn't okay with it, then I wasn't going to go any farther. But they were all fine with it, luckily.
Talk about Tetris. It's Tetris of time, because not only that, you have to remain under 32 hours of rehearsal, including with those in mind too. So
I will say on a positive note about showcases and festivals, you're gonna learn a lot more on those types of productions, meaning the other departments and how to focus lights and a rep plot and all that. When you're not on an off-Broadway show, you're not on a Broadway show, because and there's a confidence there, knowing how those instruments work and in the fast pace and your voice, and more confidence in your voice as a stage manager and bringing it on to those bigger projects. And so, because I've done so many showcases where I feel like that's really where my confidence began, doing so many of them in smaller venues. And strategically trying to figure things out very quickly. That's just one of my, and there's only 2 festivals I've been a part of where you didn't have to do the, 15 minutes in, 15 minutes out. That was Williamstown and Here Arts I did, and that was our space for the couple weeks, which was nice, but that is rare when it comes to festivals, especially in New York City. Usually it's 15 minutes in, your 45-minute show, and then you're 15 minutes out. And they will hold the stopwatch and go time. So they will give you practice. Usually in your 2 hours of tech includes practicing all that. And your actors generally will say, oh, I'm okay setting this up or doing this, because they know in their contract they can act as crew in the showcase code. So remember that as well. I've never had an actor fight me saying, oh, I can't preset this or I can't do that. But if any actor ever did, they can act as crew on a showcase code or in a festival.
And a lot of them I have found they've already had experience with it, so it's not necessarily new to them.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're self-sufficient people.
Yeah, yeah, of course, intelligent, smart.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
Well, that's not just actors. That's just
just in case. Don't worry.
The beauty is when you find an actor who completely understands how the tech works, and it's like, you want this set piece turned at this angle of 75 degrees, and you're like, yes, can I clone you?
Exactly at this angle.
I've had better actors than ASMs.
In some cases, yes. In some cases, yes.
Before we hit questions, I've got one. Why, if you continue to do showcases, what do you see as the gain of doing showcases or festivals? Because they aren't necessarily the easiest contracts.
I mean, the people you work with, and you do get to work on some great new plays occasionally, and new connections, and the people. I mean, yeah, you're not doing it because it's the most money, but I have had some long working relationships and personal relationships and people I've met on those projects, because you never know what it will lead to. So if you can do it financially and in your schedule, and it sounds something like the right project, do it. There's still all different types of art that need to be created, and a lot of that art comes from festivals and showcases. I mean, Six started at Fringe. Urinetown started at Fringe. You just never know, right?
Yeah. And I'll agree with Lizzie that, the show that I'm doing at Broadway Bound in February is a show I've been involved with previously in the reading stage. So the going to Broadway Bound is the next step. And I personally think it's a great show, and I hope it continues to move up the chain. So I do want to stay involved with it for that reason, and I love working with the people that are involved with it. But I'll give 2 other examples for reasons that I've done showcases. I did one last fall, again at Here Arts. I was already doing a show downstairs. If you're not familiar with Here Arts, there's a theater downstairs and there's a theater upstairs. And their performance times are so that the show downstairs finishes. You have about 30 minutes to get the audience into the show upstairs, and then it starts. So I was already involved with the show downstairs. They had a show that was planned in the upstairs theater that ended up canceling. And so they had somebody come in that was doing a last minute putting together of 5, 10, 15-minute plays that the author had written and wanted them all done together. And so they asked the production manager there, we need a stage manager. Do you know anybody? And so she was like, well, you could ask the person who's down here. So they called me and said, hey, we realize you're already in the downstairs theater. Would you be willing to come to the upstairs theater? It won't conflict with schedule. And I did say to them, you only get me when I'm available. The show I'm currently doing has me first. Here are the times I can be available. And I gave them a financial number that I didn't think they would meet because I was really like, oh, they'll never pay me this much. And the director and the producer were like, yeah, we'll pay you. And I was like, oh okay. So that's why I took that one. So sometimes when you ask for more than you think, you might get it. Doesn't hurt to ask. The one other showcase I did take, it was a personal reason. The writer actually happens to be a Tony-nominated costume designer, and I have a background in costuming and was really fascinated with the idea of spending 3.5 weeks working just in her ear. And then the director that was brought on board was a fairly well-known director here in New York and in Los Angeles. And the actors that I was working with were Broadway actors. So the festival part itself of that showcase was not fun, but I can tell you that nobody ever wanted to end a 10-minute break, because the stories that those people in that room could tell you all were incredible. Absolutely incredible, the stories they could tell. So that was purely personal. I took that. The pay wasn't bad, but it was a quick 3.5 weeks. And I was like, I'm going to learn and meet people that I might not meet in another situation. And yes, that has helped me get other jobs. So those would be my reasons for continuing to do showcases when and if they pop up. I do other work. The show I just closed, the end of February, was off Broadway. So I just take a showcase if it fits me financially, or if there's something that I feel like I can gain in terms of meeting new people, or it's an interesting show that might be working its way up the chain. It's the way I look at it.
I will piggyback to Lisa talking about the fee. Feel confident giving them your rate. You are an artist that is worth your rate. So if they can't pay for that, and you can't, figure out, a rate together, then you're not going to do it. But feel confident knowing what you're worth. You shouldn't, don't take advantage of yourself in that way. You're going to do the work, you have a fee, do it. And Here Art is great about that. I've worked with Here Art several times, and they've always been wonderful. And I also love working with them because they are very queer positive. They do a lot of LGBT shows, have a lot of LGBT artists on their staff and their guest artists. And as a queer woman, I love being in an environment like that, and supporting other LGBT plus artists. So sometimes it's just a personal reason in in a comfortable environment. I also love NoHo. I love being down there and just walking around, and I'd rather be down there than Midtown. That's just me personally. But yeah, I mean, there's all different reasons to choose in the moment of your life why you're going to do something. So especially after Corona, I know like roughly what my next project's going to be, but I don't know of a different freelance one. But it might be a showcase. It might be a festival. I don't know, but I'm not necessarily going to say no to it if they can pay my rate and it sounds good, and I know even if I don't know the person, I'm going to hear them out, and they're going to hear me out, and it's going to be what it's going to be.
Cool. So, questions, conversation. What do you want to know? What do you think sounds tricky about festivals? Chat, talk, either way.
Just sort of bouncing off of Morgan's comment, pay rate has always been a hard topic. The way that I kind of look at it is, especially if it's like a one-off day or a very short thing, that might be the only thing that I'm doing at the time. So I need to get paid for that. And I need to get paid as if it's not the only thing that I'm doing. So it does vary.
If you're not confident in giving them a number, and it seems like you're not giving them a high enough number, or they might not want to hire you because they might not feel you're confident, and then they might not feel you're confident in your job and your skill set. So be paid for your time, be paid for your work, and show them that. And if they agree to that, good. They're going to trust you even more, because I've had conversations with professional stage managers who have done certain projects, and they were like, they didn't hire me back one time because I didn't give them a high enough number. And that is a part of it. So you are worth every penny as an artist. Just don't forget that.
And I found what works for me. If somebody offers me a showcase and gives an amount, which oftentimes is what happens to me. They don't say what's your rate. They'll just say, oh, we have this amount of money. If it's not what I feel comfortable with, I usually will come back with, that's lower than my normal rate. Does your budget have room to grow? And that gives them an answer of, yes, we have extra money, we want you, or no, we don't. And if the answer is no, then that's fine. I wish you all the success in the world, but that does not fit my budget. To stress that I have to be able to live off of what you're paying me. So that is something that I found works for me in terms of approach.
I mean, you have to be nice about it and professional. Like, make sure you're choosing your words correctly, but, you know, just be confident. And that is like a muscle you really have to work at. Because when I was 22 and starting out, 21, I wasn't as comfortable having those conversations. But as I worked more and met more professionals, and my dad was a lawyer and was putting a lot in my head, I just found my voice naturally and felt more comfortable, you know, saying this is what I'm worth. And if, you know, they are only really able to offer you a certain amount, if they don't have room in their budget, they're like, I only have X amount of money to give my stage manager, and that's, and like, they are just, they'll be brutally honest with you sometimes and say, this is what I've set aside for that position. If you want to do it, do it. I mean, it doesn't, it's not something you, if it's just like a project you want to do and just going to be like some bonus money, I mean, whether you put that towards bills or something personal, that's okay too. So it's different for every single person, every single project.
And with a showcase, it does not say in the showcase code. As a matter of fact, it's actually not included in the budget. Any fee that they pay the actors and the stage manager is not part of, I believe it's $35,000 total is the budget for showcase. That the fee they pay you as a stage manager, the ASM, or the actors is not in that $35,000. So knowing that up front should help you a little bit with a producer, because I have worked on showcases where I feel like they have more money. They're just trying to produce it as inexpensively as possible in the city. So kind of having that knowledge makes me feel a little bit more comfortable to say, I'm worth more than what you want to offer me. Here, you know, we need to talk about moving that fee up. And if they really want you, then they've got the money. They're going to say yes.
Yeah, it's kind of like with title of show started as a festival show, and they had 4 chairs and a keyboard, and it's part of one of their songs. So, you know, they weren't spending money on their set, and their costumes were pretty much, you know, you could go buy them at any store, at any H&M at the time, pretty much. So there's money coming from elsewhere, or that can be spent elsewhere.
Yeah.
I just thought,
people who are in their show and working on their show.
and on another note, just money in entertainment generally, not just festivals and rep and showcases, they're going to give you a number to start with and see if you're confident enough to ask for more. That's also something to keep in mind, because they do have the money. They want to see if you're confident at negotiating your contract before, you know, they consider really hiring you. And most of the time they will say, yeah, we can do this, and they're going to trust you more. So it's all strategy. There's a whole strategy behind all that. Does anyone have any questions?
I would say not negotiating hasn't bitten me in the butt. I'm so, full disclosure, I have never negotiated for salary yet. I know, need to change that. We'll get there. Other things, but not salary. So, I mean, I wouldn't harp, it's great to ask, but I wouldn't harp too much on psyching yourself out for not asking. You should, but don't think it's going to be doomed for your offer if you don't.
No.
Just
Yeah, and it took me some time to get to that point of negotiating. And actually, it was Maddie DiCarlo who kind of kicked me in the butt and was like, you should be negotiating. And I was like, okay. It's not something I'm comfortable with either. And I've just started doing it probably within the last year and a half. And I do kind of take a gentler approach, like I said, of, well, is there money in the, you know, room to grow in the budget? And it's been successful for me in doing that, but it took me some time. So yeah, work yourself into it and kind of feel, what is your personality? What works for you in terms of if somebody approaches you and you instinctively feel this isn't enough, Do you want to ask for more money? Do you want to ask for a concession maybe if you're working out of town? Can they give you something extra in your housing, or, you know, things like that? What are those other ways that you can get a little extra and feel comfortable with that may not necessarily be money in that paycheck?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like some of these shows that you work on, like, it's a taboo conversation to talk about your compensation and how to like up that up. But I had this unique position working on this production once, and they weren't going to pay me. And I was like, okay, well, here are my stipulations. And once I started naming that, that's when they started being like, oh, okay. And they started to like have more value for me because I spoke up about that. So it is good to be like, okay, if let's say worst case scenario, they say no, that's the worst case scenario. They have, you know, knows a full sentence, then let's move on to like, these are like my list of stipulations. So yeah, I agree. It's always like kind of taboo. Nobody really wants to talk about money, but it is what it is.
But, you know, we do
Yeah.
this for a living. And another thing, because we all identify as women on this call, they might try to lowball you because of your sex. So that's also something you got to keep in mind. You know, they don't do that as often to men. So remember that as women, we have to feel confident asking to be paid as just as much as any other gender in person.
And Morgan, I'll say this, I came from teaching job. So for over 20 years, I had a set salary. I knew exactly how much money was going in my bank account every month of the year. And I gave it up and went to freelancing, which was a little terrifying at times. But I've always had the faith to take a deep breath and say, this job is not offering me what I feel I'm worth, and I feel comfortable saying no. Something else will come along, and it has. I've never regretted saying no to the things I've said no to, because something better has always come along. So it's having some faith in yourself to know that you are worth
And
asking for that.
just to piggyback to Ingrid's comment, and doom is not going to come if you say I need this much money, or if you don't. If you're just comfortable with what they're offering and you want to just take it, that's fine. Because if you do write a company, you know what, I need to be paid this much, and this needs to be in my contract in order to serve as on this position, on this production. They're not going to say, oh, we can't do that, best of luck to you. They're going to say, this is what we can do. Just let us know if you're comfortable with it and you can join our team. And then they leave it up to you. And it's just, you'll either write back, you know, thank you for the opportunity, but I cannot financially do this right now. And I wish you the best with the production. And you just leave it on a, you know, hope we can work together again on something else in the future. You know, keep the door open still, because they will reach out to you if it's, oh, that person, you know, needs this much money and we have this much money in their talent and I want to work with them still. It will come. That email will come, or that text or phone call, whatever form of communication. But yeah, nothing bad is also going to happen if you just if they're saying this is $500 for this showcase. Okay. I mean, they're not just going to, not every single person's going to be like, oh, they didn't feel confident in negotiating. Just, they were okay with that. And that's fine too.
I think we're almost at time.
That wraps up our time for this week.
Thank you guys for coming.
joining us.
Gals.
Yeah, thank you guys for your stories. It got me nostalgic about for showcases and festivals, something that I might want to, like, I'm always open to, but it's just like more passion projects I feel like I get into when they're like showcases. So those were fun to like hear from you guys.
Yeah, I think you got to have a passion project occasionally. Feed those creative juices. So
Yeah.
make yourself happy. Life is short. Make yourself happy.